It's Tim Hagen from Progress Coaching, and today you're going to go through something called the sales tiered assessment. This is one of my favorite things to teach, and here's why. It solves a major problem. The sales tiered assessment has a secret sauce, and it is called the tiers of learning. Now, that sounds a little bit theatrical, but I'm going to give you some insight, and you're going to see that in the demonstration, going over the slide deck after this intro video. And when you think about sales, there's a lot going on, from objections to negotiation to closing to needs-based selling, handling the gatekeeper, prospecting, sending good emails. There's a lot of varying degrees of people's talent being high, middle, and potentially really significant areas where they need to improve. And those areas tend to be very nebulous, right? He needs to get better at prospecting. But prospecting has some knowledge components, some skill components, and behavioral components. Knowledge, do they know what to do? Can they teach it back? Skill, can they practice it, simulate it fluently? Behavioral, can they do it with confidence and conviction, void of fear and anxiety? Now, the numbers are already against us as sales leaders. Leaders in general, 71% of people are neutral or actively disengaged in the workplace. Tasha Urich's work says that 95% of the people in her survey said, yes, I'm highly self-aware. She tested them, only 10% were. That means 85% fallout. Salespeople have one fundamental problem other industries don't have. We have, and I put myself in that category, we have egos. You want salespeople with egos. Those egos really prevent us from looking in the mirror and saying, you know what? I'm not as good as I think. Let me give you a little humor. Think about a salesperson saying this. When somebody goes up to the salesperson in general and says, geez, Bob, you had a great year. How come? Bob will talk all about himself. The next year, Bob, your numbers went down. What happened? Well, the economy's soft. We come up with every reason to not damage our ego. Wouldn't it be great if a sales rep said in the middle of a meeting, I'm not going to hit my numbers. I'm pretty bad at negotiation. I got to tell you something. I hate role playing. I'm not going to get better at selling skills. Now, I bet you're laughing, right? It's kind of funny what I just said, but it's also true. So here's the number that's amazing to me. 48 to 52%, we'll call it 50%. I think it's according to the Sales Management Association, people don't hit their numbers. That is a huge, huge statistic. We have not improved as an industry. So what the secret sauce is we look at your sales process. And in each stage of that process, we identify what we call sub areas or what we call functional areas. So prospecting. A job description will have cold calling. A functional area would be making 50 outbound calls every single day with absolute conviction and energy, with a unique set of selling skills, demonstrating active listening and open-ended questions flawlessly without exception. You give it some substance. Once you give it some substance, you can now inspect what you'd like to expect. So the sales tiered assessment is identifying a sales process. And what we teach you how to do, or we do it for you, is how to identify each one of those areas, okay? How do we identify each one of those areas and then create those sub-functional areas? And we then divide them into components called knowledge, skill, and behavior. That is the sales tiered assessment. We have created an assessment methodology where we can plug into your process and approach, build you an assessment, and then ultimately what we do, and this is the secret sauce, the tiers of learning, knowledge, skill, and behavior are the very things we teach in our sales progress and our non-sales progress coaching course. What we're using are models that we teach for coaching. We're using that as the apparatus to create our assessments. The reason that's so valuable is because the output of assessments, what do we typically do? We get these great looking reports, we go over them, and that's kind of it. And I'm certified in EQ, DISC, and the Motivator. It's kind of the same thing there. It doesn't really put what we call coaching application into play. What if we had the output and we identified trends in sales teams across the organization where you could apply group coaching, peer-to-peer coaching, self-coaching for each leader? Here are your coaching plans for each one of your individuals based on their strengths and gaps or areas of opportunity to improve, with the exact questions, activities, and learning projects to build accountability and consistency. So what we do is We use this methodology. We take what we teach, we apply it right on top of the assessment results, really driving the result based on your sales process and approach. So there isn't this third-party training where you have to do this application, or you have to figure out, how do I apply this? It's all done for you. So look at the slide deck presentation I'm about to go through after this intro video. Give us your impressions, and I think you're going to be really pleased. We're going to actually show you the guts of an actual assessment we're doing for one of our clients. Welcome to the Sales Tiered Assessment. During this presentation, you're going to learn a very unique methodology for creating sales assessments or developing a sales assessment that actually maps, aligns specifically with your approach and process. Now, we all know that there's tons of assessment tools, there's tons of sales training programs out there. And here's where we get into a fundamental flaw within our own industry. We do an assessment, we get the output, then what do we do with it? What do we do with it? I happen to be certified in emotional intelligence, DISC, the motivator. The same thing applies there. We get these great looking reports and it's like, what do we do with it? What we're going to do is show you a methodology. Now, we're going to not dive too deep because we want you to understand the concepts. But what we're going to do is show you a sales tiered assessment methodology that allows you to create targeted coaching solutions that pinpoints per person their strengths and where they have opportunities to improve. So here's the secret sauce. It's going to seem very simple. I'm telling you, for 32 years, I've taught leadership coaching, including sales coaching. I'm telling you right now, this is the secret sauce. This is where leaders, sales leaders, get in trouble. You got to earn the trust. You got to ask open-ended questions. Don't forget to negotiate. And we throw out a lot of rhetorical commands and demands. We tend to take a very top-down knowledge approach. We're going to train our people. So here's the secret sauce. Knowledge, can your people teach it back? And don't take that for granted. Skill, have they been practicing the skill or skills on a cadence of weekly or biweekly? Behavioral, are they confident? Can they handle it with confidence? Let me give you an example. Do you know, for 31 years, I've used this example, and I still to this day have not had someone answer it. Go up to a salesperson and say, in the event you get a competitor sales objection, in that moment, what do you say? Do you know? They never answer it. They always say, well, what I try to do is they want to narrate and describe what they would do. We are a shoot from the hip society. I'm in that society. Salespeople have an incredible gift that also bites them in the butt. We can shoot from the hip. We can kind of hang conversationally. We can navigate. And we lose consistency. We lose application of the sales process that's been set forth for us. So knowledge, do you know how to handle a competitor price objection? Skill, if you practice it, you'll become more fluent. You become more smooth in doing it. You come off less choppy, which leads to a greater perception of confidence. The last thing we want to do is buy something from somebody who's lacking confidence. Let me give you an example. When someone comes to me and says, now this is not a technique I think applies to every industry, but I want to demonstrate knowledge, skill, and behavior. When someone comes to me and says, Tim, your proposal's a little bit high. I'm talking to another competitor and I really would love to see if you could lower your price. In that moment, I do something called embrace. I said, well, first of all, what do you love about the other company? Especially if it's their present provider. And what they'll do is say, well, they're great. They're really expedient. They do this, they do that. They give me the ins because then I know what not to change. And I said, if you were advising that company to do one thing to help improve the service towards you, what would you advise them to do? Now, what I'm asking for is insight to how to unseat that particular competitor. So knowledge, I've got my responses ready. Skill, hopefully I demonstrated that fairly well. And behavioral, I don't think you would say, geez, he sounds like he's not confident. If somebody asked me a competitor price objection, and I said, oh, wow, okay, well, at that point, they have lost confidence in me because I wasn't well thought out. I didn't have the requisite knowledge, skill. I haven't been practicing. My behavior, my confidence is a little bit erratic. I just undermine my sales opportunity within about 4 to 5 seconds. Now, someone in a sales organization might argue what I just said. Why would you argue it? Because the customer determines the value of the purchase. They're the ones who determine if things go forward, not the salesperson. So we have to make it easy for people to buy from us. Knowledge. Do your salespeople know what to do? Skill. Have they practiced it? Behavioral. Can they do it with confidence? Now, here are some faults to avoid. We typically conduct an assessment, we review the assessment, and we don't put the assessment results into action. Why? It's because we don't know what to do. So when you look at handling a competitor price objection, knowledge, what we have to do is know what to say and what to do. Skill, we have to practice that. Behavioral, we have to be open and honest to feedback. Do we create a perception of confidence? Here's the funny thing. Most don't practice. Our egos get in the way when we're in sales. We're already too confident. Yet do we have confidence in handling that price objection for a competitor? Now, the other thing we have to consider is that's one of many, many things that go on in a sales interaction. So the sales tiered assessment is a mapped process to your sales approach and process. It identifies key definitions and sales expectations throughout the process. Every one of your salespeople will have varying degrees of strengths and opportunities to improve specific to your sales process and approach. The assessment is mapped, pinpointing strengths and opportunities to improve. What do we mean by mapped? The output of how to coach to the knowledge components, to the skill components, and the behavioral components. The assessment utilizes a coaching methodology to frame out the assessment. So the tiers of learning, knowledge, skill, and behavior are what we teach in our progress coaching or our sales progress coaching course. The very thing we teach, we're using as an apparatus to create the assessment. Therefore, the coaching solutions as an output from the assessment results are very easy to apply. So we run the assessment, there's a results interpretation, and then what we do is we map to desired objectives using coaching application. So if Bob is struggling with cold calling and making good cold calls, we map out a coaching solution specific to that person. If Lisa is very good at prospecting, but she gets a little bit nervous asking for the order, and she tends to get a lot of negotiation and unnecessary objections, we would pinpoint where her gaps are, knowledge, skill to behavior, and we actually create a coaching plan for her to address those areas and for the manager to apply to those areas. So think about it this way. This is a high-level sales process, right? You have prospecting, initial contact, qualifying leads, presentation, address objections, close the sale, follow-up. Typically in each one of these, there are probably about 3 to 5 functional areas that fall underneath each one of these steps. Let me give you an example. Prospecting for leads. Let's focus on that. Prospecting could be making a great cold call, handling a stall objection, handling currently working with someone already objection, voicemail, the gatekeeper. So I just identified 5 off the top of my head. Prospecting will inherently have a lot of different nuances that salespeople need to be ready for. Let's be candid. Most don't practice them. Where you don't practice, you don't improve. You cannot arbitrarily improve what you don't practice. So when you look at this, each one of these steps, no matter what your sales process or approach is, and this is very generic, and I know that, you have to identify what we call sub areas, which we call functional areas. Now, I'm going to say it. When you come back to this process, a job description will have a bullet item saying cold calling. What we then do is also help organizations create what we call functional models, functional descriptions. So this doesn't have to be yours, but think about this just for a second. Making 25 outbound calls with absolute conviction and energy without exception every single day. Now let me stop there. How often do we have salespeople not do the prospecting work because they're working on a big deal or they're working on a proposal? They're avoiding rejection. Look at the language. with absolute conviction and energy without exception, every single day pursuing the unique set of needs with thorough needs-based selling, demonstrating incredible conviction to actively listen and truly understand the unique sets of needs for every engaged process without exception. Now, I could even build upon that further. So let's come back. That's one functional area for this step. So once you describe it, you cannot inspect what you do not expect. We tend to have things like bullet items, cold calling in our job description. We need to functionally describe the output. Same thing with working with a gatekeeper, working with leaving a voicemail. Let me give you an example of a client we worked with. We actually had a definition for one company that kept getting a lot of voicemails. And since the pandemic, let's be honest, we're trying to call people on their cell phones. People are at their desks as much as they used to be. So things have really changed, right? And we had this one company where we actually had one of the outputs for their leaving voicemail was to imitate a radio disc jockey. And he had to do it standing up. And people would literally stand up and leave a voicemail. Today's your lucky day. You get another voicemail, yet you don't know me. Boy, are you lucky to get to know me. And it differentiated them. Now, did people love that thought right out of the gate? No. Did they practice it? Absolutely. Did they become more inclined to do it through practice? Absolutely. And we started to increase our callbacks. We started to double the callbacks because people thought it was funny. One of our outputs was to leave a joke, but you had to call back for the punchline. So what happens is we have to be creative. We have to functionally describe what we expect and then certainly come up with some ideas to help our people. So the process. We look at your sales process and approach. We do a deep dive into 3 to 4 functional areas per stage of the process. We partition the functional areas into tiers of learning. So again, I'm going to come back. I'm going to look at prospecting. We have our definition of cold calling. Then underneath cold calling, we would identify the knowledge requirements, the skill requirements, and the behavioral requirements. Once you do that, you're going to have a very targeted set of things that you can do to ultimately do what? Pinpoint people's strengths and opportunities to improve through the assessment process, which I'm going to show you here in a bit. And once we partition them into the areas into the tiers of learning, we develop the custom assessment and then we run the assessment. And what that's going to do is give you some insight to what's going on. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually show you what a sample assessment looks like. Now, what you're looking at is a sample that we're building for a company right now. And what we've also done is we can embed a video of how to complete the assessment. That I really think is important to denote. So I'll click on this button. You'll hear it in the background. The sales tier. And we describe the process. It is important that you do that so salespeople really understand the value of being really self-aware and as honest as they possibly can be with themselves. So what we did is we broke down a particular client's process, prospecting, email introduction marketing. It's an 8-point scale. We ask rating questions. They self-rate. Now, if you notice, there are 3 questions: knowledge, ability, which is skill, confidence, which is behavioral. And it follows that methodology. So for every functional area, there are roughly 24 points. Handling stall objections. And as you can see, this is a very lengthy process. If you really want to pinpoint what's going on in your organization, if you really want to pinpoint each and every salesperson's strengths and opportunities to improve, this is very easy to do. And what we do is we get a very elaborate report. We can partition it out to each and every employee in a sales organization, pinpointing and then creating a coaching plan specific to their strengths, how they need to go about protecting them, potentially working with other people, and then identifying their areas of opportunity to improve. So we create a very consistent methodology. And then people get a percentage of points or a percentage based on the number of points in terms of what is possible as it relates to the total points. That really depends on your sales process and the number of functional areas. But you can see we really do a deep dive, okay? So this is what this assessment methodology looks like. And we certainly ask some other questions as well, but this is from prospecting to closing to following up with the customer and what have you. So again, when you look at these areas, for each area, we're going to help you identify, potentially redefine each area. And the more specific, the more specificity, the more targeted your coaching and training and performance improvement can be applied. Once you do that, you'll go through the process. You define it per area, typically about 4 to 5 per area. You do a deep dive into those 3 to 4 functional areas, rewrite them, redefine them if you need to. If you already have this done, great. You partition the functional areas into tiers of learning, knowledge, skill, and behavior. I just showed that in the assessment. And then you develop an assessment based on your specific needs. And then you run the assessment. Now, what's not here is once we're done running the assessment, we do a debrief with the sales leaders. We identify trends that can be applied to team coaching, group coaching, peer-to-peer coaching, how leaders can then do one-on-one coaching with each and every one of their sales reps. We literally make the process of sales coaching easy and